To the outside world, a fight is a moment of high drama, a burst of action, strength and skill compressed into a brief, visceral encounter. But for the fighter, this moment is only the tip of the iceberg, a result of an unseen journey carved out of extreme physical and mental endurance. Each punch, each takedown, each second in the octagon is a culmination woven from countless hours of solitude, suffering, and sacrifice. Before the lights and the crowds, there's a silence where a fighter's mind faces itself, wrestling with doubts, fears, and the gnawing desire to prove something, often something that words can't capture. What drives someone to stand alone, to sacrifice comfort, to push past pain, to be willing to lose, and sometimes even broken? There's a reason why many consider fighting to be the purest test of will. Not just because of the clash with an opponent, but because of the deeper confrontation within. Here, stripped of almost everything, clad in little more than shorts and gloves, and burdened by neither armor nor pretense, the fighter confronts a raw reality. They must find meaning, not in victory alone, but in the willingness to endure, to return to this path again and again. Here, without distraction, every limitation and every strength is laid bare for the world to see. In the life of the fighter, there are no shortcuts. Each step forward is earned, each backward glance a reminder of the cost. Yet this journey, demanding as it is, carves a path that few can understand. The path leading to the octagon is one that confronts the very core of what it means to test the limits of human capability. It's now where we'll delve into this journey, a story not simply of skill or technique, but of resilience, of facing fears and finding purpose even in the face of defeat. For in the octagon, a fighter is not merely facing an opponent within the cage, they're facing an opponent within themselves, standing face to face with everything they are and everything they could become. Join us as we trace the journey from the grueling reality of training camp to the ruthless demands of weight cut, from the quiet resolve of preparation to the piercing spotlight of public exposure, and finally to the octagon itself, a place where victory and defeat are separated by fractions of the second, where a single misstep can mean the difference between triumph and loss. And when that loss comes, we'll feel the emotional aftermath, the raw reality of life outside the cage, where a fighter's spirit is now tested not by the man facing him in the arena, but instead, the man facing him in the mirror. For every elite fighter, the journey begins with the training camp, an experience that represents a stark contrast to what we see as viewers. Away from the arena, away from the praise or scrutiny, and into a world that demands everything. It's a stretch of time that can feel endless, defined by early mornings, late nights, and the constant ache that comes from pushing the body past its natural limits. For 6, 8, even 12 weeks, the fighter is caught in a cycle of exhaustion and recovery, strength and sacrifice. Each day begins with purpose, yet the routine itself borders on ritual, one that is both relentless and unforgiving. A fighter's day in the camp is often mapped down to the hour, implementing drills which reflect their commitment to optimizing conditioning, wrestling, striking, grappling, and even sparring. They drill combinations, perfect their stance, hone their reflexes, all under the watchful eyes of coaches and trainers. In each session, they aim for precision, each movement refined until the fighter's body almost forgets its own limitations. But the wear is inevitable. For a fighter, camp is a place of constant tension, a place where the line between strength and fatigue becomes razor thin. Muscles strain, tendons tighten, and injuries become as much part of the process as progress. The body is challenged beyond what it's built for, torn down and rebuilt in the pursuit of something that lies just out of reach, a peak performance. Yet camp is more than just physical conditioning. It's a crucible for the mind, a place where resilience is tested as much as skill. For many fighters, this period is a journey inward, a constant confrontation with themselves that pushes them to redefine their boundaries. Training camp is perhaps one of the best real-world examples we have, underscoring the process of transformation, a process in which cost is almost always inevitable. Friends and family fade into the background, social events become distant memories. Every hour spent on the mat, every minute of conditioning, is an hour and minute spent away from life as most people know it. The sacrifices of training camp are rarely seen, rarely felt by anyone outside of the world. The fighter is isolated by the demands of a process that only they can fully understand. Yet, amidst the sacrifice, there's a strange clarity. For the fighter, camp represents a purity of purpose, a focus on one thing, one goal. The transactional occurrences of daily life become distant echoes. And then there's the matter of pain. In camp, pain is no longer an enemy to be avoided. It becomes a companion. Each joint, each muscle, each fibre of the fighter is being tested. To the outsider, this may seem masochistic. The fatigue and soreness might seem like a punishment, but to the fighter, It's a necessary passage, a sign that they're pushing past their old limits and into uncharted territory. And yet in the midst of all this physical and mental hardship, there's an undeniable satisfaction. As each week passes, the fighter feels a subtle shift. There's an edge, a sharpening of their senses, a deepened focus that grows with each day. Little by little, doubt gives way to belief. Fatigue makes room for strength, and the raw, rough edges begin to smooth. In those moments, the fighter begins to taste the fruits of their labour, a fleeting yet satisfying glimpse of what all the sacrifice has been for. They feel the difference in each movement, each breath. The once grueling workouts now testament to their growth. The pain endured, the isolation faced, well, they all make sense now, as they realise they're no longer who they were when they first stepped into camp. Training camp in many ways is a paradox. It's both exhausting and fulfilling, isolating yet deeply personal, a place of suffering and strength. For as much as the fighter leaves behind comfort, social connections, the ease of daily life, they gain something intangible, something profound, a readiness, a resilience, a strength born of countless hours of solitude, effort, and quiet endurance. And as the camp nears to its end, they carry with them more than just the skills they've honed. They carry a renewed sense of self, one that will be tested and, if strong enough, affirmed when they finally step into the octagon. But before any of this is made possible, the fighter needs to deal with what many deem the harshest reality of the journey, the weight cut, the process of reducing body weight to meet the rigid demands of their weight class. This isn't just a matter of dedication, it's a physiological test of control, discipline, and ultimately resilience. In the days leading up to the weigh-in, the fighter begins to strip down ounce by ounce. Water intake is adjusted and the sodium intake is also reduced to a level which is low enough to stimulate water loss, while still supporting muscle function. In further efforts to purge water, fibre and carbohydrates are cut out. While science suggests no more than 10% reduction in body weight for health, fighters often push far beyond this limit, some dropping upwards of 20%. In extreme cases, the process becomes a brutal ordeal, where scientific measures blend with desperation. Meals shrink, water is limited to mere sips, and activity is more intense. As the hours pass, the dehydration intensifies. Thirst becomes a constant, pressing need, heightened by sodium depletion and calorie restriction. The final stretch approaches, where all that remains is to sweat out the last remnants of water weight. Some fighters take to the sauna, where the sweltering heat pushes every last bead of sweat from their skin. Others resort to hot baths, where some fighters can spend up to 45 minutes submerged in hot water. And for these final 24 hours, water, if not limited to mere sips already, it may be reduced to nothing. Fatigue is at its most extreme. The sense of depletion grows as the fighter pushes through the haze of relentless dizziness, intense headaches, frequent muscle cramps, blinking that aches the eyes, and with some fighters even reporting temporary blindness. Then comes the weigh-in. Standing before the scale, the fighter feels the weight of weeks of preparation. The scale reveals the number that validates their suffering, a feeling less reflective of joyful victory, but rather a fleeting relief. The weight's made, the fight's on. The 36 hours after the weigh-in become a structured race to restore strength, to regain what was just lost. Only then, finally hydrated, refueled, and rested, do they feel the renewed strength that will carry them into the octagon. In the week leading up to the fight, alongside these physical demands, the pressures of being under the spotlight of media scrutiny escalate. The fighter, who has spent weeks in quiet isolation honing focus, must now navigate this world of exposure, a world where every word, every expression becomes part of the narrative that surrounds the fight, a continuous stream of media obligations, each demanding a piece of their attention and composure. To the public, this spectacle often seems like another part of the fighter's strategy, a platform to raise their stocks, provoke reactions, and even add fuel to rivalry. Here, bold statements and trash talk can drive interest. To the fighter, this dangerous sport with high stakes is seen as a matter of life or death, but they must understand that for everyone else, it's entertainment. Every fighter is both blessed and cursed with the choice to partake in this, acutely aware of the impact this may have on pay, advertisement deals, and even future opportunities that may arise as a consequence of the money you make for the organization. In this era, the warrior must also become a brand. The struggle between becoming a showman and protecting the mental clarity they've worked so hard to build is continuous. And then there's the opponent, the mind games, the stares, the words exchanged. In this highly public space, the fight begins long before the octagon. The quiet focus, cultivated in isolation, stands in stark contrast to the exposure now. Every statement revealing just enough to satisfy the demands of the public, but concealing what truly matters. In other words, the fighter must build a persona, balancing honesty and even humour with restraint, projecting confidence while shielding the mental clarity that a peak performance is reliant on. Then comes the day of the fight. Hours before this, the world grows quiet. The fighter, after weeks of preparation, now finds themselves in a kind of suspended time, caught between the end of camp and the beginning of battle. They sit in the locker room, their body warmed up and taped, every joint, every muscle, testament to the training and sacrifice that has led them here. Outside, the crowd gathers, the arena fills, and with each passing second, the anticipation builds, almost like the tightening of a spring about to release. The mind begins to narrow its focus, blocking out everything that lies beyond the four walls they find themselves in. Adrenaline rises, a surge of energy coursing through the body. They must hone it, breathing slower and deeper, ensuring the physiological response transforms not into chaotic energy, but into sharpened awareness. Each breath tempers the rush, channeling it into focused control, refining the edge they'll need in the octagon. Here, amidst the quiet murmurs of coaches, the fighters in solitude, mentally rehearsing every move, every counter, visualizing every second of the fight. And finally the call comes. It's time to walk. With each step into the tunnel, the roar of the crowd grows louder, until it becomes an ocean of sound, enveloping the fighter in boos and cheers. As the fighter crosses into the octagon, their world is reduced to the cage and the opponent before them. And then, there's a moment of stillness. Across from them stands their opponent, an equally determined force. In this moment, there's no media, no crowd, no distractions, only the intensity of the two fighters, each prepared to confront the other's skill and will. The referee signals to start, and in an instant, training, strategy, and instinct collide. The fight itself is a whirlwind, a blur of movement, of blocks and strikes, of adrenaline surging and muscles responding with a reflex, honed by countless hours of repetition. The octagon becomes a crucible, a space where every ounce of preparation is distilled into action, where there's no room for hesitation, only the raw immediacy of each moment. Every feint, every counter, every strike demands absolute focus, as a split-second decision can determine the outcome. Here, they're not simply athletes but warriors, navigating the thin line between control and chaos. Each round stretches into eternity, yet passes in an instant. The fighter's body aches, lungs heave, but they press forward, driven by the same force that brought them here. The desire not just to win, but to transcend, to find out in this single moment exactly what they're capable of, a validation for the path they've chosen. The fight then reaches its breaking point. A single misstep, a fraction of hesitation, and the opponent seizes the opening. A sharp blow connects, a punch that disarms, shocks, and then silences. The fighter feels the impact radiate, and then everything blurs and fades to black. The lights, the crowd, the cage, they all vanish. And in that moment, they're alone, with the disorienting silence that comes with defeat. When awareness returns, there's a painful clarity, a raw understanding of what just transpired. Lying on the canvas, the fighter is engulfed in a wave of emotions that go beyond the physical pain. There's an ache deeper than bruises or broken bones, a hollow realization that everything they trained for, every sacrifice, every step of this journey has been brought to an abrupt end. The octagon, once a place of hope and potential, now feels like enemy territory. As they rise to their feet, they're met with concerned faces, cheers of the crowd praising the opponent, flashing cameras, all capturing this deeply personal moment of vulnerability. Each step out of the octagon feels heavier than the last, each sound a reminder of the fight that slipped through their fingers. The walk back to the locker room is a lonely one. No words can amend their loss. There's only the unspoken understanding that tonight, they weren't enough. In the quiet of the locker room, the adrenaline fades, leaving a deep, aching exhaustion in its place. The body, battered and bruised, is now only part of the pain. The fighter is left with the mental weight, the slow realization that the journey they invested everything into has ended, not in triumph, but in defeat. The world outside blurs, leaving only the raw truth of failure. As the hours pass, the emotional fallout begins to settle. Memories of the fight replay in flashes, each missed opportunity and failed strategy magnified, scrutinized, dissected. The self-doubt follows closely behind, seeping in through the cracks left by their loss. For some fighters, the loss leaves a wound that festers, the scar that lingers long after the physical bruises fade. It becomes an ever-present reminder of limitations, a shadow that follows. The defeat becomes a mirror, reflecting not only their vulnerabilities but also the resilience needed to face them. There's a reckoning here, a choice to be made. Some fighters will use this moment as fuel, point of introspection that drives them to return stronger, to reclaim what was lost. Others, however, may find the emotional toll too great, the demands of the sport too unforgiving, choosing instead to step away. In the end, this loss, as painful as it is, becomes a defining chapter in the fighter's journey. For here, in the fallout of defeat, they face not an opponent, but the truth of who they are and what they're willing to endure. This moment tests their resolve, their reason for fighting in ways that victory never could. And as they stand at this crossroad, they confront a decision that goes beyond the octagon, a decision about the path they are willing to walk and the sacrifices they're willing to make. Because in fighting, it's not only the victory that shapes a fighter, it's the losses, the failures, and the quiet moments of self-reflection that ultimately reveal whether they have what it takes to be a master of this violent craft. The demands of combat at this level are extreme, a rare path that few can withstand. This, more than anything, is a testament to both the physical and psychological hardship required to compete on this unforgiving stage, a resilience that defines only the most formidable of human beings.